While I may use medical terminology in this podcast, please note that I am not a licensed medical professional. Any information provided is for general knowledge purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for personalized medical guidance. Welcome to today's episode of the Real Estate Wealth Podcast, where we focus not only on real estate investing, but also on a resilient mindset and a commitment to maintaining overall health and longevity. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today, Dr. Helen Messier. Dr. Messier is the Chief Medical and Science Officer at Fountain Life, which is a pioneering company dedicated to revolutionizing healthcare through advanced diagnostics and personalized medicine. Dr. Messier received a Bachelor of Science and PhD in molecular immunology from the University of Alberta, as well as completing a postdoctorate study at the La Jolla Institute for Allergy and Immunology in San Diego. Helen has been at the cutting edge of integrating exponential technologies such as artificial intelligence, genomics, and cellular medicine into practice health strategies. Her work at Fountain Life focuses on leveraging advanced diagnostic tools to detect diseases before they manifest, enabling individuals to maintain peak health and vitality. So Helen, welcome to the Real Estate Wealth Podcast, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Ed. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Excellent. So you and I met, I guess, last August, right, at Peter Diamandis's longevity conference, Platinum Conference back east. And it was fascinating. We went to MIT, learned some of the most cutting edge diagnostics and leaders in the longevity field in the world that spoke to us from Harvard, MIT, et cetera. Dean Kamen, of course, in New Hampshire, doing some amazing things. But I was inspired by the talk you gave and learning about Fountain Life that I actually joined. So full disclosure, I am a client of Fountain Life and my family is as well. So I'm a big believer in kind of what you guys are doing. I love being proactive about, health. I mean, the title of this is Becoming the CEO of Your Own Health, which I think is really, really important.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about the current system. I mean, the current medical system is broken, I think. And I think, I have a lot of doctor friends, and I think they, to a certain extent, would agree with that as well. Where really, the way I see it is, doctors today are sort of forced to operate within a confined box, right? Which is insurance, kind of what insurance will dictate. Pharma, what pharma drugs or procedures they can do, as well as just, rules and regulations within maybe the hospital they're at or the industry itself. And so I think it kind of restricts, some of the things they can do, and it's become more reactionary. It seems like Western medicine today is very reactionary, right? So can you kind of explain sort of what you guys are doing at Fountain Life, how it came to be, and what, how we got to this place within the medical system?
Yeah, I mean, this is the greatest question you can ask, Ed. I think it really, you laid it out really well. It epitomizes the problem with our medical system, our whole healthcare system right now. Talk about healthcare when really it's not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system, right? It's a system that waits until you have some kind of significant symptom, at least, and usually by the time you have a symptom, the diseases are very far advanced. And then it waits till you have a symptom, and then it really goes in there and helps control the symptoms. Waits till you have pain. We're really good at controlling symptoms, of taking pain away, controlling things for the short term. But 80% of what we see in our medical system and our healthcare system is chronic disease. And chronic disease does not really lend itself well to that model of waiting for symptoms to occur and then going in there and try to fix those symptoms. The chronic disease, and this is really epitomizes my journey into the medical world as well. I started out as a scientist and then went in and did my medical degree, and am a primary care physician. And in primary care, 80% of what I saw was chronic disease. And the tools that I learned in medicine weren't enough to actually actually change the trajectory of those diseases. I wasn't able to reverse those diseases with the tools I learned, and I wasn't able to prevent them. That's the most important thing. So these chronic diseases have very long kind of what we call long latency diseases. They take a long time to develop. You don't just catch diabetes overnight. Right. A lot of people might think you do. They might think that, gosh, I just got, I went to my doctor and he told me I have diabetes. And it's like, well, no, that diabetes probably was developing over the last couple decades, not just in the last time, couple weeks before you went to the doctor. Now, by the time you get symptoms from diabetes, that you've probably had the diabetes for another decade before it often causes symptoms where it's really a problem. So all of that is set up. If we wait until you have symptoms and then we wait to just control those symptoms, we're not doing anything to change the people who get disease in the first place. We're not preventing them, and we're not doing anything to reverse those diseases. We're all familiar with being told, at least I was, like, don't go to your doctor unless you're really sick. Right? It has to be really bad before you go see your doctor. And so, that's really the wrong mindset to think about how are we going to change this? And it really is, we've talked about a pandemic that we just went through, but it's an epidemic, and I'd say a pandemic of chronic disease that we're in the middle of right now. And that chronic disease, if we wait until the end and really try to treat people once we have symptoms, is going to really bankrupt our whole healthcare system as it is today, especially with Medicare, where, aging is the biggest risk factor for getting these chronic diseases. And as our population ages, we are going to see more and more and more of this. And the answer is not, I was listening to a program where they were talking about the epidemic of Alzheimer's disease that was coming down the pipe as our population ages. And if we wait, as the answer was on the people talking on the radio program I was listening to, we don't have enough nursing homes was the answer. We need to start building more nursing homes now. In my view, that's waiting way until the horse is out of the barn, right? It is to close the barn doors. We need to catch things. We need to prevent Alzheimer's. And that's what we're doing at Fountain Life, is really just changing that whole conversation around healthcare from that reactive model, waiting till you get sick, to being very proactive, finding things very early, when they're way more treatable, when they're easily reversible. And that's what's going to change the trajectory, not just of the healthcare system, but a lot of people are going to benefit from that as well.
Right, because the human body is like a master of disguise, right? Kind of like Peter says, like it can hide. It's really, really good at hiding disease for a long time. And my theory is the human body is amazing, and it's probably doing everything it can to try to fix the problem before it really presents. But in our society today, or the way medicine works today, until it presents as a symptom, like you said, and then they treat the symptom. But I've always been amazed at why don't they look further into what is the cause of the symptom? Like, why do we treat symptoms typically with a drug, right, which suppresses the symptom, but doesn't address the root cause of why you had it to begin with or how to eliminate it?
Exactly right. In a good example of waiting so long is cardiovascular disease. So cardiovascular disease, still the number one killer, right? We've known about this for a long time. We know what causes it. We know how it progresses. And yet more people die of cardiovascular disease, men and women, even younger and younger ages, than anything else. And it's really tragic that this is happening. So by the time you have symptoms of cardiovascular disease, by the time you get chest pain, you're out shoveling the walk or going for a walk and you get angina or chest pain, you've got over a 70% blockage in the blood flowing to feed your heart. That blockage would have taken decades to get there. And we all know of the people who, 70% of people that die of a heart attack have zero symptoms ahead of time. The very first symptom
Right.
of heart disease is actually a heart attack. And half of those people, their first heart attack is their last heart attack because they don't survive. And yet, if you take a step back, we know what to do. We know the things that drive cardiovascular disease. It'll be different in different people. So understanding that root cause, as you mentioned, is so critical. What is it? We know that the gut microbiome is connected. We know obviously your diet and your lifestyle and all of those things, high blood pressure, cholesterol levels are important. But a lot of people, again, a majority of people who have heart attacks have normal cholesterol levels. So it's more than just the cholesterol. We have to look at what's driving it in you as the individual, and then what can we do to address those root causes. And once you do that, you can actually start to reverse some of these chronic diseases.
But Helen, how do you think we got here? Like to me, just logically, as a business person, I would think if I'm an insurance company, right, I would want to know early. To your point, things caught early can be reversed, oftentimes cured, eliminated, or at least treated properly, versus waiting and having the reactionary medicine that we do today. Wouldn't it be in their best interest to pay for and these preventative type tests, which typically aren't covered, right? I think like when you look at cancer screening, you tell me I think only like 4 or 5. We only screen for like 4 or 5 cancers, or something like that, right? Where there's obviously hundreds that we don't screen for. And so why do you think the system has gotten to where it is today? Just from an insurance standpoint, it doesn't make sense.
And
from a cost standpoint.
You're absolutely right. It doesn't make sense, and yet the answer to the question is follow the money, right? It's we know that pharmaceuticals, you get paid for, like doctors. Let me just give a good example of this. There's a new test that uses AI that can, again, predict that soft plaque, the plaque that can rupture and drive heart disease. It was presented to a number of people in hospitals, and they went, wow, we can now predict who does or doesn't need an angiography, like where you put the dye in your veins, which is a big procedure, very costly procedure. And the people in the hospital went, close the door. No, we actually don't want this test. It makes total sense. Yet, if we did that, we would not be billing for the majority of angiograms that are done that are negative. Right. So the idea is that all of your payment models, you no longer make money because, even pharmaceutical companies, CEOs of pharmaceutical companies are on record saying the best drug to develop is not the one that cures disease. The best drug from their perspective to develop is the one that a person has to take the rest of their life, that controls the symptoms.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
So,
if you came up with something that's going to cure, like I always tell people, like, no one's looking too hard to cure cancer. Trust me. It is
it's
way too big of a business. Way too big of a business.
Exactly. And insurance companies pay those out. You can bet insurance companies are not losing money, then the premiums go up. Right. Really the only people, if you think about it, that should be interested in this preventive model are life insurance companies. Right? Because life insurance benefit if the longer you stay alive. And so I think there are some innovative companies that are starting to look at understanding that, wow, if we really look at things proactively and preventatively, it is better for the bottom line. But the way that the system is set up now, doctors don't get paid to be preventative. Your doctor, it takes time. It takes, all of the tests that we do in Fountain Life, or most of them, not all, but most of them aren't even covered by regular insurance or Medicare because it's very preventative. And so, it's a big machine, and changing this machine is not easy.
I know. I kind of have an ongoing tongue-in-cheek joke where I will only see doctors that don't take insurance, which I'm kind of serious about. And to your point earlier, I think you were mentioning, the heart scan that you guys do, which I had done, that Clearly scan. It's called Clearly, and it's amazing. It's basically, it presents you with a 3D, AI generated picture of your heart, every vessel, and I could see, that, and I had some plaquing in there, which I guess is normal for someone my age, but it was really absolutely amazing to see every artery, where the plaquing is, etc. And I actually went. And so I took it to a cardiologist in Beverly Hills here locally because I wanted to just get another read on it, right? And, again, I looked for a guy who is sort of operates more holistically. And this guy had an interesting background because he used to run the heart clinic at Cedars-Sinai for years and years. So, a classically trained medical doctor, cardiologist. But now, and I was joking, I'm like, so you flipped over to the dark side because now he practices a lot of holistic heart medicine. But I like the fact that he speaks both languages, right? Because I think it's important to speak both. But interesting enough, when I showed him the Clearly scan, he, to your point about cholesterol, he told me, he goes, look, cholesterol is, it's obviously essential. You die if you have low cholesterol. We've had this sort of misnomer conjecture that high cholesterol is the death knell, the killer, which has been really promoted by the sugar industry, the corn industry, the food industry, right? Where really sugar, I think more and more doctors are figuring out and learning that sugar, it combined, and you can explain it better than me, but the glucose makes the cholesterol sticky, which makes it dangerous. And
that's absolutely right. So if you think of cholesterol, cholesterol is associated with heart disease. There's no question. We know that the LDL, or the ApoB, which is the protein that carries that low density cholesterol around, is associated with it. And if I see someone with cardiovascular disease and that is really high, I'll work on bringing that down. But cholesterol exists, to your cardiologist point, we need cholesterol for our brain. Every cell membrane is made of cholesterol. All of our hormones are made of cholesterol, right? Our body makes cholesterol. Our body wouldn't go through the big energy process of making something if it wasn't important, right? So we make cholesterol. Right. So think of cholesterol, it exists on a U-shaped curve. If you think of mortality and cholesterol levels, think of that curve. Too high cholesterol is associated with higher mortality, and too low cholesterol is associated with higher mortality. There's a sweet spot in the middle, and that might change a little bit depending on the individual, but there's a sweet spot of cholesterol. So you want to live in really that sweet spot. Now, depending on how much coronary artery disease you have, that sweet spot might change a little bit. But to your point with sugar, sugar turns out to be one of the big drivers. So we're doing some data analysis of all of our scans and blood work and so on for members like you that have come through Fountain Life. And now, couple interesting things. One is that 27% of people have that soft, mushy plaque that would be completely missed on any other way of screening. So even those who do like a calcium score with a CT scan, that would be missed because there's no calcium. And it turns out that soft plaque is the stuff that can easily rupture and cause a heart attack. So that's really critical. But it also, if you look at the plaque and its association with cholesterol, there's not really much association, but there's a big association with hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of your average blood sugar over the course of 3 months. So sugar in and of itself is very, very damaging to the walls of your arteries, that we have a kind of a Teflon coating that covers the inside of all of our arteries called the endothelial glycocalyx. And it's a very complex kind of polysaccharide coating that when that gets damaged, that's the first thing that causes plaque, or that ApoB. It allows it to enter the wall of the artery, and that's the first step in plaque formation. Turns out that high sugar damages that lining. Right. And which is why diabetics have much higher rates of heart disease. So sugar is damaging, and I think we'll hopefully get into it even more, very damaging to the body at every single level. It binds to the proteins in our body. It cause wrinkling, cross links collagen and other things that can lead to wrinkling. It activates our immune system. So these when these sugars bind to proteins in our body, that's what we call a glycation reaction. So when sugar's bound, it's glycated. They're called advanced glycation end products, or stands for AGEs, which is a perfect name for them because they cause aging. And those AGEs bind to receptors. So the receptors of advanced glycation end products called RAGEs, which is another perfect name because they rage. The immune system has receptors for these AGEs, and when they bind, it drives the inflammation across our whole body. And we know that inflammation is another one of those root causes that drive. If you have inflammation in your arteries, that drives cardiovascular disease even more. There's a great new product coming out of the UK that looks at the amount of inflammation in your arteries. And they show that even people with zero plaque, if they have high levels of inflammation, have higher rates of cardiovascular disease 5 and 10 years later. So, again, to your point and what we talked about earlier, it's so important to catch things earlier and earlier and understand the root cause. Another root cause of cardiovascular disease is our oral microbiome. The bugs that live in our mouth, we find those bugs in the arteries in the plaque. And we know that inflammation in your gums drives cardiovascular disease. You know what? The other thing we're finding in the plaque in our arteries, which is really scary, it's sort of in the news now a lot, but microplastics. So
yes,
the toxins
from fish, a lot of it comes out of fish too. These microplastics, not only mercury, but the plastics, right?
Exactly. So toxins drive inflammation and cardiovascular disease. So really, it's important to look at all of those factors that might be driving it. Not just, it might be important to take your statin drug, but I think you'd be doing a disservice if you just stop there. You really need to look at all of the other components that might be driving it.
Mm-hmm. But isn't a lot of it diet? Like when you look at, our ancestor cavemen, where they had no sort of processed sugars in their diet. And now over the last 100 years, we've introduced a ton of it, which causes, I guess, insulin resistance, right? Which is a
exactly.
big sort of buzzword today, which really seems to be at the root cause of a lot of these chronic diseses.
You're absolutely right. 100% right. So just to tell your listeners what insulin resistance is, if you eat sugar, right? We need a little bit. Yep. Sugar is kind of like cholesterol. We need it. We'll die if we don't have any sugar, right? Hypoglycemia is a problem, low blood sugar. But when the sugar gets too high, we talked about all of the problems that happens with that. So when we eat something that gets turned into sugar, you eat that sweet or that candy or even, pasta or white bread or other things, that it gets absorbed and it's sugar in our bloodstream. Our body will make insulin, and insulin is like that little door knocker that kind of knocks on the door of the cell and tells the sugar to go inside the cell, out of the bloodstream into the cell where the cell can do something with it and it's safer. Over time, if you have high blood sugar over time, our cells get a little tired of opening the door. So it's like the little boy who cried wolf too many times, right? Oh, there's that insulin knocking again. I'm not going to open the door. And so what happens is we start to develop this insulin resistance. So when the cell gets a little too tired and it doesn't let the sugar in as quickly and it's not listening to the insulin as well as it did before, that's what we call insulin resistance. And so what our body does is it responds and it makes more insulin. It's like, if you're not going to open up for this much, I'm going to give you more insulin and you're going to open up. And so it becomes a vicious circle where we make more and more insulin. Our cells become more insulin resistant. And that is ultimately what drives diabetes. So that
right. So that would be a cause of
that is type 2 diabetes. Exactly.
Which aren't we seeing in younger and younger kids? We're
seeing it in very young kids. We're seeing it in like tweens and, even before that. And that's a real problem. So if we think about why this is happening, if we think about the people that are alive here on Earth, we are the ones that evolved to survive our past, right? When our caveman past that you mentioned, we had to live through famines. Right? We had to live through, say, winters where there wasn't a lot of food. And so the people that were able to survive were the ones and pass on their genes were the ones that survived those famines and those winters. Well, it turns out that we're very thrifty. And we're wonderfully, kind of flexible. So if you think now in the fall, we probably did have a little bit of sugar available. We probably, this doesn't apply to Florida where I live now, right? But if we think about people who had to live through winters, there was probably some honey, there was probably some sweet fruit with fructose, and we would eat that. And we would also probably eat the fat in, the animals that we killed, and that combination will create a transient insulin resistance. And what does insulin resistance do? It causes you to put on fat, right? It causes you to store that energy as extra fat. And that, when we were able to do that, that would allow us to actually survive the winter. Now, the challenge becomes, and you lose that insulin resistance over the winter in your periods of fasting. What we have now in our modern society where we have food all the time, right? Where there's no time where we have to go through those periods of famine or fasting, we now have this ongoing insulin resistance and, of course, the epidemic of diabetes.
Right. And so can you explain, Helen, because I also hear how it's related to, I hear that like metabolic disorder, like the cause of a lot of chronic illness today is really all metabolic disorder, right?
Yes.
So is that sort of the same thing related to this insulin resistance?
Yeah, that's exactly the same thing. So, insulin resistance, we would categorize that as a metabolic disorder. Right. That we already talked about causes inflammation, causes you to gain weight, and especially that abdominal fat can drive inflammation a lot. And that sugar also causes your mitochondria. It damages your mitochondria. So those are a really important part of our overall metabolism. The mitochondria are the little power plants of your cell. We have, hundreds of sometimes thousands of mitochondria in every single cell in our body. And they're the ones that take the food that we eat and they turn it into energy in the form of ATP. So ATP is just our body's energy currency. We need ATP to do anything. Just thinking right now, sitting here talking, my body's burning ATP. Moving a muscle, we need ATP to essentially do anything. If we don't have ATP, we're dead in like less than a second. So we have to constantly create ATP to drive all of the processes that we need to do in our body, all the metabolic, biochemical pathways, all of these things that are happening all the time. And when those mitochondria become more damaged, they become inefficient. And we're not making energy as well as or as efficiently as we can. And part of that, when those mitochondria get inefficient or damaged, they also produce a lot of oxidative stress and inflammation. It turns out that cancer, for example, is really a metabolic disease. That mitochondrial dysfunction drives cardiovascular disease, it drives insulin resistance and diabetes, it drives cancer, it drives neurocognitive disease because our brain needs a lot of energy, and when those mitochondria are damaged, so any kind of neurological disease, it really is one of the central underpinnings and root cause of disease. So when you say that all of these chronic diseases are really come down to metabolic, I think that's accurate.
So in a sense, like we sort of manufacture, or our body makes these diseases as a result of breaking down, I guess, to a certain extent, right? The mitochondria.
Yeah, and it turns out, it does a lot of work to try to keep up with the environment that we're in. So it's not that our body's not responding appropriately. It's just that there's a mismatch between our body's response and our environment. and so, we're not meant to be in high sugar foods all the time. Right? We're not meant to be exposed to all of these. The other thing, these toxins that we talked about are very damaging to our mitochondria. We weren't meant to be in toxins all the time. Our body was it can detoxify very well. But when you sort of have too many toxins that overcomes our body's ability to detoxify, now we start causing a lot of damage. Sleep can cause, dysfunction, lack of sleep, lack of movement. One of the ways to keep really healthy mitochondria, of course, the diet, what we feed it, lots of antioxidants and a very plant-rich diet. Also movement, right? Just exercise is a really great way to train and improve your mitochondrial efficiency. So all of these lifestyle factors that we all know, we all say, yeah, I know I have to sleep. Yeah, I know I have to exercise. I know I have to, eat right. But we now know to minute detail why these are so important. So the science has caught up with our understanding of what good lifestyle is. And we really, I think, can refine it now to bring it to a personal level where I can say, Ed, it's really important for you to eat this kind of diet, to have this type of exercise and movement, to get this much sleep. I think we can start to dial it into a very personal level now.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of the goal of Fountain Life, right? To really personalize based on who you are, exactly down to your DNA strand.
Exactly.
What sort of personalized treatment or medicine or diet